The alien armada hovered in the darkness of space, their warships forming an unbreakable wall between Earth and the stars. They had waited for a response, for the humans to send a fleet to defend their world. But nothing came. No massive war machines, no desperate counterattack. Just silence. High Commander Zal Vorek of the Zortharian Dominion studied the holographic display of Earth. His people had conquered hundreds of worlds, and every species followed the same predictable pattern. They resisted, they sent their fleets, and they lost. It was a cycle as old as war itself. But the humans? They were an anomaly. High Commander, our scans confirm no large-scale mobilization, reported his second-in-command, a lean, green-skinned officer named Torvek. Their planetary defenses are minimal. Their fleet is scattered across distant sectors. This planet should already be under our control. Zalvorek nodded, his mandibles clicking in thought. Perhaps they surrender without a fight. Perhaps they know resistance is futile. Still, something felt wrong. The humans were not known for surrendering. If the reports were true, they were a violent, chaotic species that fought even when defeat was certain. So why were they silent? Then, the alert came. High Commander, a single vessel has exited slipspace at the edge of our formation. A single ship? Zalvorek frowned. Show me. On the main screen, a lone human vessel drifted into view. It was a strange, outdated thing, smaller than even the Zortharian corvettes. Its hull was patched and battle-worn, with clear signs of past damage. A relic from an older war, barely held together. Laughter spread through the Zortharian command deck. One ship? Torvek smirked. Is this a joke? An act of defiance? Zalvorek did not laugh. His instincts, honed by decades of war, screamed at him that something was off. Hail them, he ordered. A moment later the screen flickered, and the image of a human appeared. He was older, grizzled, with sharp, tired eyes and a scar running down his cheek. He sat in the dimly lit cockpit of his battered ship, leaning forward like a predator waiting to strike. This is Captain Elias Kane of the Blackbird, the human said, his voice calm, almost amused. Looks like you were expecting an army. Sorry to disappoint. Zalvorek narrowed his eyes. You come alone? Kane smirked. Yeah, figured a fleet would be overkill. Laughter rang out again from the Zortharian crew. This human is mad, Torvek said, shaking his head. Shall I order his vessel destroyed? But Zalvorek hesitated. There was something unsettling about the human's confidence. What is your purpose here, Captain Kane? Kane leaned back in his chair. See, I read up on you guys. Every species you've conquered had one thing in common. They played by your rules. They sent their fleets, fought fair, tried to win a war of attrition. That's not really humanity's style. You believe you can stand against the might of the Dominion alone? Zalvorek asked, curiosity creeping into his voice. Kane chuckled. Not alone. But I'm not here to fight a war. I'm here to end one. Then, before Zalvorek could respond, every warning alarm on the Zortharian flagship erupted at once. High Commander! The human ship! It's... The screen glitched, static filling the air. The bridge shuddered as if reality itself had been torn open. The Blackbird, that tiny, outdated ship, had just triggered something massive, something unseen. Then, the stars themselves began to shift. The Zortharian flagship trembled, its massive hull groaning as if the very fabric of space had been twisted around it. High Commander Zalvorek clutched the edge of his command chair, his mandibles clicking in alarm. Status report, he barked. The bridge was in chaos. Officers scrambled to their stations, their sleek, green-skinned hands flying over control panels as screens flickered wildly. Torvek, his second-in-command, stared at the data streams with wide, disbelieving eyes. Sir, some kind of spatial disruption. originating from the human ship. Zalvorek's gaze snapped back to the screen. There, floating in the void, the Blackbird remained still. No weapons fired, no shields activated, just a single battered ship against an armada of warships. And yet, something was happening. "The gravitational field around us is shifting," another officer reported. "Energy readings spiking across the spectrum. He hesitated, his voice cracking with fear. "Sir, it's not coming from the human ship itself. It's using something else, something we can't see." Zalvorek turned back to Kane, who was still on the communication screen. The human's smirk hadn't faded. "You feel that, Commander?" Kane asked, his voice dripping with amusement. "That's what happens when you pick a fight with someone who doesn't play by the rules." Zalvorek's claws tightened into fists. "What have you done?" Kane shrugged. "See, your empire has conquered hundreds of civilizations, but they all had one thing in common. They thought war was about fleets, firepower, and strategy." His smile widened. "Humans, we don't fight wars, we end them." Before Zalvorek could respond, the space around the Blackbird seemed to ripple, bending like the surface of a disturbed pond. Then, without warning, something huge emerged. It was impossible. A shadow darker than the void itself stretched across the battlefield, blotting out starlight. Zalvorek's blood ran cold as he watched an unseen force manifest. Something vast, ancient, and utterly alien. The Zortharian flagship's sensors overloaded in an instant. The readings made no sense. It was there, but also wasn't. A structure without mass, a presence without form. The Dominion's technology had no way of measuring it, only feeling its sheer, crushing weight. Torvek's voice was barely a whisper. "By the ancestors. What is that?" Kane leaned forward in his seat, his voice calm. "That? That's something your kind never had to deal with before. See? The thing about humans? We've been playing with things we don't fully understand for centuries. The massive entity, whatever it was, shifted. Then, in a blink, the Zortharian warships around it began to vanish. Not explode, not flee, just gone." Zalvorek watched in horror as entire battlecruisers, each one capable of razing cities, were simply erased from existence. No energy signatures, no debris, as if they had never been there at all. The bridge descended into pure panic. "High Commander, we're losing ships. They're just disappearing." Zalvorek's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. "No, this is impossible. We are the Dominion. Then a sudden silence. Kane sighed. "You thought we'd send a fleet." He gestured lazily to the entity looming behind him. "We sent a warning." Zalvorek couldn't breathe. The Dominion had conquered countless worlds, crushed rebellions, shattered fleets. Never had they encountered something like this. Never had one ship brought an armada to its knees. The realization settled into his bones. The humans hadn't come to fight. They had come to teach a lesson. And the Zortharian Dominion was learning it the hard way. Zalvorek could feel his twin hearts pounding in his chest. His entire command bridge was in chaos, officers shouting, alarms blaring, and the cold, crushing knowledge that the Dominion's greatest fleet was being unmade before his very eyes. And it was all because of one human ship. The Blackbird hadn't fired a single shot. It hadn't deployed any fighters. It hadn't even raised its shields. Yet something, some force, was answering its call. One by one, Zortharian warships continued to vanish. No explosions, no debris, just an empty void where they once existed. It was as if the universe itself had decided to erase them. Zalvorek's claws dug into his command chair as he turned back to the human on the screen. What have you done?" he demanded, his voice raw with fury and fear. Captain Kane just leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, that damnable smirk still on his face. "You ever hear about Schrodinger's cat, Commander?" Kane asked casually. "It's this old human thought experiment about something being both alive and dead at the same time. It's all about observation. Until you look, you don't know what's real." Zalvorek growled, his patience burning away. "What does that nonsense have to do with this?" He gestured wildly to the screen displaying the destruction of his fleet. Kane chuckled. "Well, let's just say humanity took that idea and applied it to some interesting fields of research." His grin widened. "Turns out if you tinker with the right kind of physics, you can make an entire fleet exist in a state of maybe." Torvek, pale and trembling, turned to his commander. "Sir, I think—" He swallowed. "I think the human is using quantum uncertainty as a weapon." Zalvorek's breath caught. "Impossible." "Yeah," Kane said, as if reading his mind. "That's what we thought too. Then we started figuring out how to apply it. And now?" He nodded toward the disappearing warships. "Now your fleet is stuck in a Schrodinger's box of its own. It's not here. It's not gone. It's just undecided." A fresh wave of horror crashed over the command bridge. This was not conventional warfare. This was something else entirely. Zalvorek had fought in countless campaigns. He had seen species throw everything they had against the Dominion, from biological warfare to planet-destroying superweapons. Nothing had prepared him for this. "Call the retreat," Torvek whispered. His voice was barely audible over the alarms. "High Commander, if we stay here, we might all—" Then the flagship lurched. Every officer was thrown to the floor as the artificial gravity flickered. The lights dimmed. Zalvorek scrambled to his feet, his vision swimming. "Report!" he roared. A technician, barely holding himself upright, stared at his console in horror. "Sir, we're being pulled into the effect." Zalvorek turned back to Kane, desperation creeping into his voice. "This is madness." Kane gave a slow nod. "Yeah, probably. Do you understand what you're doing? This is genocide." Kane's smirk finally faded. "No," he said, his voice colder now. "Genocide is what your kind does. This is a message." Zalvorek's breath hitched. "A message?" "Yeah." Kane leaned in, his face filling the screen. "We're not like the others you've conquered. We don't fight fair. We don't play by your rules. And we sure as hell don't let people like you take what's ours." Zalvorek's claws trembled. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. He was the one pleading now. "End this," he growled. "Tell us what you want." Kane held up a single finger. "Simple. You go home. You tell your Dominion that Earth is off limits. You don't come back. Ever." Zalvorek hesitated. Was it even possible? Could the Dominion walk away from this humiliation? He thought of the ships that were already gone, the soldiers who had simply ceased to be. If he refused, how many more would disappear? Torvek looked at him, eyes filled with unspoken terror. Zalvorek exhaled slowly. "We will withdraw," he said, the words tasting like poison. "The Dominion will not return to this system." Kane nodded approvingly. "Smart choice, Commander." The Blackbird flickered on the screen, the massive entity behind it beginning to dissolve, fading back into the void like a nightmare slipping away from waking consciousness. One by one, the remaining Zortharian ships turned and vanished into slipspace. Zalvorek sat heavily in his chair, his body trembling. For the first time in his long, victorious career, he had been utterly defeated, and by one human ship. The silence that followed was unbearable. Zalvorek sat frozen in his command chair, his mind reeling. The impossible had happened. The greatest fleet in the Zortharian Dominion had been brought to its knees, not by overwhelming force, but by something far worse. The unknown. The Blackbird was still there, its small, unassuming frame drifting like a speck against the vast darkness of space. The thing, whatever it was, that had erased entire warships had vanished, but its presence still lingered in the air, like the scent of smoke after a raging fire. "High Commander," Torvek whispered, his voice barely steady, "the fleet has successfully retreated. Our ships have re-entered slipspace. We are the last remaining vessel in the sector." Zalvorek could barely process the words. His forces had fled, run, from a single human ship. The shame burned inside him, but beneath it, something else festered. Fear. On the screen, Kane leaned forward again, his expression unreadable. "Good," the human said. "You made the right choice." Zalvorek bared his fangs, his pride screaming for him to lash out, to reclaim even a shred of dignity. You think this is over?" His voice was a low snarl. "You have no idea what the Dominion is capable of. We will—" Kane held up a single finger. "Don't," he interrupted. His voice was quiet, but something about it made the entire command bridge go still. Zalvorek swallowed hard. "You're thinking about revenge," Kane continued, "about rallying a bigger fleet, maybe bringing some of those fancy doomsday weapons you lizards like to hoard." He leaned in, and for the first time, his smirk was completely gone. "You won't." Zalvorek's mandibles twitched. "You cannot stop the Dominion." Kane exhaled. "You're right," he admitted. "We can't stop an empire. We can't hold off the full force of your entire war machine." Then, his lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But we don't have to." Zalvorek frowned. "What do you mean?" Kane's gaze darkened. "See, Commander, the thing about humanity is, we don't need numbers. We don't need the biggest fleet. We don't need planetary defenses." His voice lowered, and every Zortharian officer listening felt an instinctual chill creep down their spines. "We just need one ship." Zalvorek's twin hearts skipped a beat. "We don't fight like the others you've conquered," Kane continued, his voice smooth and calm, but carrying the weight of an unspoken threat. "We don't march in formation and wait for our turn to die." He gestured lazily to his own vessel. "This little rust bucket? Just one of many. We've got thousands of these, maybe tens of thousands. Some of them even have worse surprises than this one." He tilted his head. "So, if you decide to come back? If you think we're just some backwater species waiting to be conquered?" Kane's voice dropped to a whisper, but the weight behind his words was heavier than any fleet. "We will be waiting." Zalvorek could hardly breathe. His mind raced through possibilities. Could this be a bluff? An illusion? Some form of psychological warfare? But the truth gnawed at him. The Dominion had ruled unchallenged for centuries, crushing civilizations with sheer numbers, overwhelming them with technological superiority. But the humans were different. They didn't rely on fleets. They didn't engage in wars of attrition. They found weaknesses, exploited them. And worst of all, they seemed to enjoy it. Zalvorek clenched his fists, fury and humiliation roiling in his gut. He wanted to scream, to retaliate, to do something. But he knew that any move against these creatures would only lead to catastrophe. Kane studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Glad we understand each other." With that, the screen cut to black. The Blackbird tilted slightly, as if giving a lazy salute. Then, without a sound, it blinked out of existence. Zalvorek remained seated in stunned silence. His bridge crew stood frozen, waiting for their commander to say something. Anything. Torvek swallowed hard. "Orders, High Commander?" Zalvorek's claws dug into his armrests. "Set course for home," he muttered. Torvek hesitated. "And what will we tell the Dominion?" Zalvorek closed his eyes. He thought of the ships that had vanished, the force that had unraveled reality itself, the humans' final words. His stomach twisted as he realized the true extent of what had just happened. The Dominion had just encountered something it did not understand. And for the first time in its long, ruthless history, it had backed down. The journey back to Zortharian space was silent. The command bridge, once a place of dominance and certainty, now felt suffocating, like a tomb. No one spoke. No one dared. High Commander Zalvorek sat motionless in his chair, his mind running through 1,000 scenarios, 1,000 excuses, 1,000 lies he could tell the Dominion to explain what had happened. But no matter how he twisted the truth, one fact remained. They had been defeated, not in battle, not through firepower or strategy, but by something far worse, something the Dominion had never encountered before. A human had made them afraid. The bridge remained eerily still as the ship neared Dominion-controlled space. The massive capital world of Zalthoria loomed ahead, its planetary defenses scanning the returning flagship with curiosity. They expected a report of another conquest, another victory. They would receive neither. Torvek finally broke the silence. His voice was quiet, hesitant. "High Commander," he said, his words careful, "what shall we tell the High Council?" Zalvorek exhaled slowly. The truth? That a single human ship had dismantled their fleet without firing a shot? That their greatest warships had simply ceased to exist? That the humans had weapons even the Dominion could not understand? He would not deliver such a humiliating defeat to the High Council. It would not only be the end of his career, it would send shockwaves through the Dominion itself. They had ruled through fear for centuries. If the Council learned that they had been the ones to feel fear, the Dominion might never recover. "Tell them." Zalvorek's voice was slow, measured, as he chose his words carefully. "Tell them the humans possess an unknown weapon, one that makes continued aggression unwise." Torvek's mandibles twitched in discomfort. Unwise? Zalvorek's claws flexed, his pride screaming at him to say something else, to deny the truth, to fight back. But Kane's words still echoed in his head. "We will be waiting." A chill ran through him. "Yes," he said at last, his voice hollow. "Tell them Earth is off limits." Torvek stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. The order was relayed, sent through encrypted channels straight to the Dominion's highest authorities. Zalvorek closed his eyes. Earth was off limits, not by treaty, not by surrender, by fear. 6 months later. Far beyond the Dominion's borders, deep in human-controlled space, Captain Elias Kane sat in a dimly lit bar, sipping at a glass of something that burned on the way down. He had expected to be called in for a debriefing after the incident with the Zortharians. Expected to be interrogated, studied, maybe even locked away for what he'd done. Instead, he'd been given something far more surprising. A promotion. A quiet one, of course. Nothing official. But word had spread through the right channels. High-ranking officials in humanity's black-budget operations had taken notice, and soon after, Kane had received an offer, not to lead a fleet, not to command an army, but to do what he did best. One ship. He smirked, swirling the drink in his hand. That was all it took. The Dominion had expected a war. Instead, they'd been given a lesson, and now? Now humanity had a very special fleet, thousands of ships scattered across the galaxy. Some old, some new, some barely holding together with rust and duct tape. But each one carrying a pilot who understood the game. A game the rest of the galaxy hadn't even realized they were playing. Kane took another sip, then leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. The Dominion wouldn't be coming back. Not today. Maybe not ever. Because somewhere out there, in the dark and endless void, a human ship was always waiting. The Dominion may have left Earth alone, for now, but Zalvorek knew the High Council would not let the matter rest forever. The Zortharian Dominion had never suffered a defeat like this before. Even though he had reported the truth in the most controlled manner possible, whispers had begun to spread. A single human ship had forced the withdrawal of an entire armada. The mere thought of it gnawed at him. As the weeks passed, the pressure from the High Council increased. Demands for more information, for intelligence reports, for a way to counter the humans' impossible weapon. But the problem wasn't just the weapon. It was them. They fought differently, thought differently. They didn't believe in grand displays of power or noble duels between fleets. They were scavengers, tricksters, ghosts in the dark. And now they knew the Dominion was afraid. Kane sat across from a man whose presence radiated quiet authority. Director Cole of ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence. The kind of man who rarely showed his face in public, who operated in the shadows behind human expansion. Kane had seen the type before, but today was different. "You did something remarkable, Captain," Cole said, his voice calm but weighted. "The Dominion has officially withdrawn from Earth's sector. No probes, no spies, no military buildup at our borders. They're not just retreating." He leaned forward. "They're scared." Kane took a sip of his drink. "Good. Let's keep it that way." Cole studied him for a moment, then slid a datapad across the table. "What if I told you we could do more than that?" Kane raised an eyebrow. Cole tapped the screen. A star map flickered to life. "The Dominion is massive, but it isn't unshakable," Cole explained. "Their empire survives because they project strength. They rule through intimidation, not loyalty." A new set of markers appeared, some in Dominion space, others on the edges of human-controlled systems. "We've been in contact with certain interested parties inside their territory, rebellions, dissidents, species that hate being under Zortharian rule." Kane's eyes flicked over the map. "You want me to stir the pot?" Cole smiled slightly. "More than that, I want you to do exactly what you did at Earth, but not once." He gestured to the stars. "Everywhere." Kane chuckled. "You want me to make the whole damn Dominion afraid of the dark?" "Yes," Cole said simply. Kane sat back, considering. One ship, that's all it took. One ship playing by a different set of rules. His grin widened. "Sounds like a hell of a job." High Commander Zalvorek stood before the High Council, his posture rigid. The chamber was vast, filled with towering pillars of glowing energy. The councilors sat in a half-circle around him, their elongated faces locked in expressions of disapproval. "This is unacceptable," one of them hissed. "You fled from one ship?" Zalvorek's mandibles tightened. "I retreated to preserve the fleet. Had we stayed, we would have suffered total annihilation." Another councilor scoffed. "We are the Dominion. We do not flee from inferior species." Zalvorek stepped forward, his voice rising. "They are not inferior." The room fell silent. The words felt like acid on his tongue, but he could not deny them. "The humans do not fight like the others we have conquered," Zalvorek continued. "They do not throw fleets at us in desperate, doomed attempts. They think differently. They fight differently." He took a breath. "And they have weapons we do not understand. That should concern you all." The council remained still. Then the High Chancellor, an ancient and scarred Zortharian, leaned forward. His reptilian eyes were piercing. "You fear them," he said. Not a question. A statement. Zalvorek did not answer. The High Chancellor studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to the others. Begin the preparations. We must learn everything there is to know about these humans. A pause. And if they truly are a threat, his eyes gleamed, we will burn their world to ash. Kane's blackbird drifted in the shadow of a gas giant, watching. The Dominion fleet ahead of him, 10 ships strong, was escorting a supply convoy. A perfect target. Kane exhaled, his fingers resting lightly on the controls. This wasn't Earth. There would be no diplomacy here. Just a lesson. One ship. One ghost in the dark. And by the time the Dominion realized what had happened, it would already be too late. The Dominion war convoy moved in perfect formation, 10 warships flanking 3 massive supply carriers. Their engines burned bright as they cut through space, confident in their overwhelming firepower. They had no idea they were being watched. Captain Elias Kane sat in the dim cockpit of the Blackbird, eyes locked on the targeting readout. His ship, patched together from stolen parts and old tech, barely even registered on Dominion scanners. That was the point. The Zortharians had built their empire by crushing enemies before they could resist. Kane was about to introduce them to an enemy they couldn't fight. "All right, let's see how well you handle the unknown," he muttered. He flicked a switch. The lights on his ship flickered as the experimental device spun up. Humanity's newest trick, an evolution of the technology that had erased the Dominion fleet before. This wasn't about destruction. This was about fear. The space around the Blackbird rippled, warping like a mirage. Then Kane activated the signal jammer. Instantly, the Dominion fleet's comms died. On board the Dominion flagship, alarms shrieked. "Hi, Captain, we're under electronic attack," a Zortharian officer shouted. "Source?" "Unknown. There's no ship on sensors, but something is here." Then, the first warship vanished. Not exploded, not destroyed, just gone. Panic spread like wildfire. The Dominion fleet broke formation, scanning wildly for a threat they couldn't see. Kane grinned. Works every time. He didn't need to destroy the convoy. He just needed them to run. And run they did. Within minutes, the entire Dominion escort was in full retreat, warships jumping to slip space, abandoning their precious supply carriers in sheer primal terror. The supply ships drifted, unprotected, helpless. Kane opened his communications. "This is the Blackbird to Rebel Command. Your supplies have been delivered." A voice crackled through the speakers. "Holy hell, Kane. That worked?" Kane smirked. "Told you, they don't need to lose a war." His fingers tapped the dashboard. "They just need to believe they've already lost." Back on Zalthoria, the High Chancellor paced. The reports were disturbing. Supply convoys were vanishing. Military patrols were being driven away by phantoms. Entire sectors had fallen into panic. The humans weren't attacking like a traditional enemy. They weren't launching invasions or sieging planets. They were hunting fear itself. "Find the humans responsible," the High Chancellor growled. "Find them and end them." Zalvorek, standing stiffly nearby, exhaled slowly. "That will not be easy, Chancellor." The old ruler's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Zalvorek hesitated. Then finally he said the words he had dreaded since the retreat from Earth. "Because they have already won." The chamber went deathly silent. Zalvorek's voice remained steady. "The humans are not fighting for territory. They are not fighting to win battles. They are fighting to make us afraid." He looked around at the other counselors, their expressions dark. "And they have succeeded." Kane landed the Blackbird on a hidden rebel outpost, stepping down onto the rough metal platform. A group of resistance fighters greeted him, their eyes filled with something he rarely saw in alien species under Dominion rule. Hope. "You did it," their leader, a grizzled reptilian named Torin, said, shaking his head in disbelief. "The Dominion is in disarray. They don't know how to fight this kind of war." Kane smiled. "Then let's make sure they never learn." Torin handed him a new data pad, filled with mission reports and targets. "The Dominion is already pulling resources from their core systems to secure the outer colonies," Torin explained. "They're stretched thin. If we push harder, we might—" A warning siren blared. One of the rebels ran in. "Sir, we have incoming ships!" Kane's smile faded. The Dominion had found them. And this time, they weren't running. The warning siren howled across the rebel outpost as Kane sprinted to the nearest terminal. The display flickered to life, revealing a cluster of incoming ships dropping from slip space. Dominion warships. Fast ones. "How the hell did they find us?" Torin growled, gripping his sidearm. Kane's mind raced. The Dominion was paranoid now. He had expected them to send scouts, maybe a few patrols to search the system. But this wasn't a search party. It was an execution squad. "Doesn't matter," Kane said, already moving. "We need to be gone 5 minutes ago." Torin turned to his people. "Get to the transports now." The rebels scattered, scrambling to load supplies and weapons onto their ships. Outside, the sky cracked open as the Dominion fleet descended. Sleek, blade-like ships cut through the atmosphere, their weapons glowing a sickly green. The Dominion had learned something. They weren't waiting. They weren't sending messages. They were here to kill. Kane sprinted back towards the Blackbird, his mind calculating a way out. His ship was fast, stealthy, but against a full Dominion strike force, even he didn't like his odds. A thunderous boom shook the ground as the first Dominion barrage hit. Explosions tore through the outpost, sending debris and bodies flying. "Move! Move!" Torin shouted, shoving his people towards their transports. Kane hit the cockpit of the Blackbird and powered it up. The engines roared as he flicked through emergency startup procedures, skipping half the safety checks. A rebel ship tried to launch, only to be torn apart mid-air by Dominion fighters. Kane cursed. No time. He activated his comms. "Torin, tell your people to scatter. Single large targets won't make it, but small ones might." Torin hesitated, then growled. "You heard him. Break up and run." One by one, the rebel ships began launching, darting in different directions. The Dominion opened fire, trying to track them all at once. Kane grabbed the flight controls and yanked the Blackbird into a tight roll, dodging a burst of energy fire. He twisted through the chaos, heading straight for the upper atmosphere. A Dominion fighter locked onto him. The targeting alarm screamed. Kane's jaw tightened. "All right, let's see if this still works." He flipped a switch. The Blackbird's hull flickered, distorting like a heat mirage. The fighter's weapons discharged, right into empty space. The Blackbird was already gone. High above the battlefield, aboard the Dominion warship Vorax Claw, a pair of slitted eyes watched the conflict unfold. High Commander Tor Zanak, a veteran of 100 campaigns, clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. The humans were clever, dangerous, but not invincible. "They fight like ghosts," one of his officers murmured, "slipping in and out of battle, never engaging directly." Torzanak let out a low, rumbling laugh. "Then let us exterminate the ghosts." He gestured toward the battlefield below. "Begin the purge." The officer hesitated. "Sir, there are still prisoners planetside. Should we—" Torzanak's eyes flashed. "Burn it all." A moment later, Dominion warships unleashed their true weapon, a planetary sterilization beam. The rebel base, the surrounding landscape, everything was engulfed in a blinding inferno. The Blackbird drifted in high orbit, sensors tracking the devastation below. Kane's hands clenched into fists as he watched the rebel base vanish beneath the Dominion's fury. He had seen war before. He had seen cruelty. But this was something else. Torin's last transmission had cut out mid-sentence. Kane didn't know if his friend had made it out. Didn't know if anyone had. His ship's systems beeped, tracking the Dominion fleet as it prepared to leave. They hadn't stayed to loot. They hadn't stayed to gloat. They had burned everything and moved on. Kane exhaled slowly, his rage simmering beneath the surface. They wanted to play that kind of war? Fine. He would teach them what true terror looked like. The Blackbird drifted through space, its pilot silent. Kane's hands rested on the controls, but he wasn't flying. Not yet. He was watching the Dominion fleet vanish into slipspace, leaving nothing behind but scorched earth and ash. Torin, the rebels, the outpost, gone. For a long time, he sat there, staring at the dead world below. Then, without a word, he turned the ship and set course for the nearest rebel hideout. The Dominion had made their move. Now it was his turn. 2 weeks later, the Dominion's logistics network was in chaos. Fuel depots detonated without warning. Military supply routes collapsed. Communication relays mysteriously failed. Entire warships disappeared without a trace. The Dominion High Council was in a panic. "This is unacceptable," one of the counselors hissed. "How does an empire of our magnitude suffer at the hands of one man?" Zalvorek sat in silence. He knew the answer. It wasn't about the damage Kane was causing. It was about the fear. The Dominion relied on its reputation, on its enemies believing that resistance was useless. Now they had an enemy who refused to play by the rules. And worse, others were watching. Dissident groups, rebellions, entire species that had once cowered under Dominion rule. They were seeing the cracks, and some were starting to think, maybe the Dominion wasn't invincible after all. Zalvorek stood suddenly, turning to the High Chancellor. "If we do not eliminate this human, our empire will fall." The High Chancellor's reptilian eyes narrowed. "Then find him. Kill him." Zalvorek's voice was ice-cold. "Oh, I intend to." Kane knew the Dominion would eventually stop running and start fighting back. They had to. The assassins came first. Silent killers with cloaked ships and poison-tipped blades. Kane left their corpses floating in the void. Then came the bounty hunters, mercenaries from across the galaxy, eager to claim the reward on his head. He made examples of them. But then came Zalvorek himself. The High Commander wasn't just another Dominion officer. He was a predator, smart, relentless, and disciplined, and he had set a trap. Kane only realized it when his ship's systems locked up mid-flight. The Blackbird shuddered as some kind of Dominion gravity weapon ripped him out of slipspace. An entire fleet waited for him. Dozens of warships, hundreds of fighters. Kane's usual tricks wouldn't work here. No stealth, no running, just him and an armada. His lips curled into a smirk. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see how much hell one human can raise." The Dominion ships opened fire. Kane's ship rolled, dodging the first barrage, but he knew he was outmatched. So he did the only thing that made sense. He went straight for the flagship. Dodging and weaving through enemy fire, he pushed the Blackbird into a full-speed assault run. The Dominion fighters scrambled to keep up. Kane flicked a switch. The Blackbird's experimental quantum weapon spun to life. Only this time, it wasn't set to erase ships. It was set to unravel the laws of physics themselves. The space around the Dominion fleet twisted. Suddenly, ships were and weren't at the same time. Some folded in on themselves. Others drifted dead in space, their crews lost to madness. Panic tore through the Dominion ranks, and then Kane boarded Zalvorek's flagship. The halls of the Dominion warship were eerily silent. Kane moved like a shadow, his weapon in hand, and then, at the heart of the ship, he found him. Zalvorek stood tall, his reptilian form towering over Kane, his twin blades drawn. "This ends today, human," he growled. Kane rolled his shoulders. Yeah, he agreed. It does. The fight was brutal, fast, deadly. Zalvorek was a trained warrior, his blades a blur. Kane fought dirty. Quick strikes, misdirection, anything to gain an edge. Blades clashed. Blood spilled. Then, finally, Kane drove his knife into Zalvorek's chest. The High Commander staggered, eyes wide with disbelief. Kane leaned in. That fear you feel? He whispered. That's what your empire is built on. He twisted the knife. And that's why it's going to fall. Zalvorek slumped to the floor, his reign of terror ending in silence. With Zalvorek dead and the Dominion fleet in chaos, the rest of the rebellion struck. System by system, the Dominion collapsed. Worlds that had once lived in fear rose up. Fleets that had once crushed opposition fled. And then, finally, the High Chancellor himself was forced to surrender. The Dominion was no more. And Kane? Kane disappeared. Some say he retired. Others say he still roams the stars, a ghost in the void, waiting for the next tyrant foolish enough to rise. But one thing is certain. The legend of the one human ship that changed everything will never be forgotten.